He called me on FaceTime and he showed me that he her on FaceTime as I was on there. And he told me, I said, Trey, that's your daughter. That is your daughter. Stop.
But then he showed me the lifeless corpse of my granddaughter. I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
A mother's heartbreak. She tells us the story of watching FaceTime as the father of her child kills the 2-year-old.
2-year-old Zevaya Flanagan was known by many as a brilliant child who had a personality that shined brighter than you could imagine. She was loving, bubbly, and she kept the most amazing attitude at all times, bringing so much light into this dark world we share with one another. In March of 2023, Zevaya was 2 years old and living in Houston, Texas, with her parents Deontray Flanagan and Kairsten Watson, who months prior to this officially decided to separate and go their own ways. Meaning Zevaya was splitting her time with her parents. Oftentimes she would be with Kairsten, and other times she would be spending it with her father Deontray. Unfortunately, the breakup between Deontray and Kairsten was far from amicable. There was a lot of tension between the two of them, and the majority of that resentment seemed to be coming from Deontray's side of the equation. According to Kairsten, all she wanted and was trying to do was move on from Deontray and their relationship, but Deontray was having none of it. He couldn't fathom the thought of Kairsten loving another man, getting into a relationship, or just being happy. Even though the ex-couple had officially gone their separate ways, he was constantly accusing Kairsten of being involved with another guy. And it led this 26-year-old man to do the unthinkable. And in a up turn of events, he decided to bring his 2-year-old daughter directly into the middle of the conflict. Kairsten would be bombarded with text messages, phone calls, and Deontray showing up at her house, threatening to harm Zevaya for no other reason than to get back at her for trying to move on. Several days before tragedy struck the Houston area, between March 15th and the 20th of 2023, Kairsten had no choice but to call the authorities on multiple occasions to report her growing concerns for her daughter Zevaya's safety. Not only was Deontray consistently speaking about harming Zevaya, his actions were becoming more and more dangerous by the day. On March 15th of that year, Kairsten was at home with Zevaya, and she was giving her daughter a bath that night when suddenly Deontray stormed into their home and grabbed his daughter out of the tub before fleeing the house with the little girl. Zevaya wasn't even dressed at the time, this pickup was never planned, and Deontray just kind of showed up unannounced and angrily took his daughter out of the tub without even really saying anything to Kairsten, which obviously caused an immense amount of fear in Kairsten, knowing how unhinged he was. So she called the authorities to report what happened, explaining to the responding officers that she was truly scared for her daughter's well-being due to the overwhelming amount of threats she received and the fact she had no idea where Deontray and Zevaya were at the moment. Though it seemed to Kairsten the officers involved didn't really take her serious, even though she had the text messages to prove that Deontray was in fact threatening serious bodily harm to his daughter. It didn't matter though, as the officers would tell Kairsten they had insufficient evidence, and because of that, they were unable to file a criminal complaint, saying to Kairsten there was nothing they could really do to help her in this dispute. Kairsten would say it felt like the authorities thought she was making this entire story up, but she wasn't. And she basically told them, like, no, I need you to help me keep my daughter safe, and I need you to listen, or I know something terrible is going to happen to Zevaya if nothing is done. Blatantly asking them if they were going to wait until something horrific happened to the 2-year-old before they decided to intervene. It's my assumption because there was no court-ordered custody, they didn't think this situation was as dire as it truly was, and it added to their nonchalance in handling this case. Again, that's just my speculation though. Regardless, the authorities wouldn't put much effort into locating Deontray and Zevaya that day, besides a brief welfare check that resulted in nothing. They didn't find them, but Zevaya was brought home unharmed the following day, as I mentioned. According to the records, that was the day the Harris County Police Department responded to the call of a terroristic threat, being everything we just covered, including the text messages. Then 4 days later, on the 19th of March, they responded to another call of telephone harassment regarding the same situation with Deontray. The threats and insanity of Deontray's texts and phone calls were only getting worse, but they were continually being reported to police in order to protect Zevaya. But the reality is, the authorities either truly believed they couldn't help her in this situation, or they just didn't want to put the effort in. Unfortunately, within days of these 911 calls being made, 2-year-old Zevaya Flanagan would be targeted, attacked, and taken on a high-speed chase before ending up dead after going through hell at the hands of her father.
What did I do? Like, what are you doing this to me for? Like, I love you. Like, why are you hurting me?
It was Monday morning, the 20th of March 2023. Zevaya had already been dropped off at a regular daycare center early that morning because Kairsten had to work, and she worked at one of the nearby Walmarts. Sometime after Zevaya had settled into a routine, her father Deontray would show up at her daycare unannounced and remove her from the facility, telling the staff members some made-up story about why his daughter needed to leave with him. Subsequent to their departure from the daycare, he and Sevaya would drive up to the local Walmart where Kairsten was working at the time, and he carries his 2-year-old daughter inside to confront Kairsten about loving another man. Once Deontray located Kairsten inside this Walmart, he began screaming at her and demanding her phone and the passcode to it so he could go through it and see for himself what she had been up to. Otherwise, he was going to hurt their daughter. This confrontation was loud and very aggressive coming from Deontray, so Kairsten is repeatedly telling him the passcode to her phone, but it didn't calm Deontray down at all. In the middle of this heated argument, Deontray decided to strike Kairsten in the face multiple times before snatching her phone and storming out of the store with Zevaya, and now Kairsten's phone. Mind you, this altercation took place inside of the Walmart where she was working, so there was many people around them. After being attacked herself, and at this point in utter fear for her daughter's life, Kairsten would of course call the authorities again to report what just happened in the store, but this time with witnesses and clear signs of violence on her face after he hit her. Officers would arrive on scene, they took note of the situation, and then they started to track Kairsten's phone as fast as they possibly could, trying to locate Deontray and Zevaya. Now this part confused me a little bit because some of the reports will say Kairsten's mother also worked at the Walmart where she did, and it was her phone that she would use to FaceTime Deontray with. But it was Zevaya's grandfather who was also on FaceTime with Deontray throughout the chaos. It's undeniable the two people who were on the phone the most with Deontray throughout the majority of it was Kairsten and her father, Curtis Watson. It's in every interview and video regarding this situation. Regardless, a FaceTime call would eventually be made connecting Kairsten and Deontray, and once they were on the phone, Kairsten begins desperately pleading with Deontray to stop what he's doing. However, when Kairsten first saw her daughter's face, she knew how detrimental this situation had become, as one of the first things she witnessed on the video call was Zevaya's face covered in blood. This was due to her father striking her in the face with some kind of object. It's unclear exactly what that object was, but it caused her to bleed profusely. Throughout the entirety of the video call, Kairsten would continually beg Deontray to put an end to this, reminding him just how much Zevaya loved him.
Her face was just covered in blood. He hit her with something really hard. And then he called me on FaceTime, and he showed me that he choked her on FaceTime as I was on there. And I said, Trey, that's your daughter. That is your daughter. Stop. That is your daughter. She loves you. I care about her. You care about her. Like, that is your daughter. And he told me, his exact words was, you only love that man, so you did this to her. He just wanted my phone. He's screaming at me, cursing me out, telling me, what's the passcode? Tell me the passcode or she's gonna get it. Like, and I'm telling him the passcode, and I'm telling him over and over and over. But at the end of the day, I guess it just wasn't enough.
The things that Curtis and Kairsten had to witness are truly unimaginable. They were forced to watch him strangle their 2-year-old little girl while she was sitting on her father's lap, gasping for air. At some point while all of this was happening, the authorities finally found the location of Kairsten's phone, which led them straight to Deontray and Zevaya. He was driving down the road in his red Camaro, and officers would try to pull him over with lights and sirens, but he refused to stop for them, which ultimately led Deontray to take the authorities on a high-speed chase with his 2-year-old daughter in the backseat of the vehicle with no seatbelt on. Kairsten and Curtis tried everything in their power to bring an end to this and stop Deontray from continuing to harm his daughter. As hopeful as Curtis and Kairsten were, it eventually became clear to Curtis just how vile this man was as they were pleading for Zevaya's safe return, and Deontray's response was to turn the camera and show Curtis the motionless body of his granddaughter who was still covered in blood. It was so far beyond brutal that Kairsten was almost certain he had already killed the little girl.
But then he showed me the lifeless corpse of my granddaughter. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, and to have to go through that type of anguish and pain.
Due to the severity of this situation, the SWAT team would be called in to help bring this dramatic chase to an end. During the pursuit, authorities became aware that Deontray had Zevaya in the car with him and was the little girl during the chase, which approximately lasted 30 to 40 minutes, exceeding speeds of 90 miles per hour. He was driving the wrong way down the roads, and authorities believe throughout that time period, Zevaya was being thrown around in the backseat of the car because, again, she was not strapped in. Eventually, Deontray would crash into some other cars on the road, bringing his vehicle to a stop, and he would be surrounded by the SWAT team and officers. However, they wouldn't move in immediately because they needed to be ready for whatever may happen, even though the little girl was obviously in grave danger. According to ABC 13, Kairsten would say, "I was telling the officers, look at this FaceTime. Move in. Move." They sat there and they said they have to get everyone ready and they have to put on their shields and all this extra stuff, like he wasn't killing her on this FaceTime call. After the 20-minute standoff with Deontray and the officers, they eventually swarmed his vehicle, pulled him out of it, and took him into custody, as you can briefly see in this video. Next, they found Zevaya, who had been tossed around in the backseat of the vehicle throughout the insanity. She was not in good shape at all, and officers would start CPR and do everything in their power to help her. She would promptly be airlifted to the nearby Memorial Hermann Hospital, where she was sadly pronounced dead from the injuries she sustained while in the care of her father. However, it had nothing to do with him driving recklessly. Her death came solely at the hands of her father, who was now in jail with a $1 million bond that was quickly upped by a judge to $2 million. Immediately after everything came to an end, the family and everyone was informed that Zevaya was deceased and she didn't survive her father's wrath. I can't even begin to comprehend the level of trauma and heartbreak that Curtis and Kairsten are dealing with after witnessing what they did. It genuinely makes me sick to my stomach to think about feeling that helpless in that moment and watching the most important part of your life get stolen from you. Kairsten talking about what her daughter must have been feeling and thinking throughout the entirety of her pain brought me to tears thinking about Zevaya.
I know in her mind, she probably was just wondering, like, what did I do? Like, what are you doing this to me for? Like, I love you. Like, why are you hurting me? They didn't want to pull nothing until she actually passed. And I told them over and over and over that something was wrong. They're going to at least try to find him or check it out. But no.
Following the death of Zevaya and Deontray being arrested, he was facing first-degree murder charges, which ultimately got upgraded to capital murder based on the autopsy and circumstances surrounding his daughter's death. Of course, she could have perished from blunt force trauma while she was unbuckled in a speeding vehicle, but it was determined that wasn't the case. Zevaya did in fact pass away from the strangulation inflicted on her by Deontray, which is why he was rightfully hit with capital murder. He's sick, and to even think to use your innocent child as leverage to get back at your significant other is beyond me. A child that needs you and relies on you for safety, love, and affection, and you turned around and targeted her for no reason other than to inflict pain on Kairsten. Behind bars is exactly where he needs to be. Just recently, in January of 2025, he was convicted of capital murder and was facing life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. Not too long after his verdict, though, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the heinous murder. Unfortunately, they didn't give you the death penalty, Deontray, and I wouldn't have flinched if they did. I honestly wish they had. I can only imagine how much stress Deontray and his attitude brought into this relationship. Kairsten would say, "All I was trying to do was provide for my daughter and move on, and I guess he just didn't want that."
We've been going our separate ways. And I let him be, but he couldn't let me be. He couldn't let me be happy. He couldn't let me move on with my life. All I was trying to do was provide for my daughter and move on, and I guess he just didn't want that.
26-year-old Deontray Flanagan is clearly a loose cannon who does not need to be on our streets. Looking at his criminal history combined with this most recent case lets us know exactly that. In 2017, he was charged with evading arrest. The following year, in 2018, he was charged with assault causing bodily injury and was sentenced to just 30 days in jail. However, the victim in that case happened to be a family member of his. A little later on that same year, he would be arrested again, this time for criminal mischief after deliberately driving his vehicle into somebody's somebody's house. And according to records, he was still on probation from that case when the nightmare with Zevaya unfolded. Which begs the question, did authorities look at Deontray and his history when Kairsten reported the threats and increasingly erratic behavior leading up to Zevaya's murder? The missed opportunities to prevent this from happening hit the spotlight shortly after Zevaya lost her life, and many people don't understand why she wasn't taken more seriously when she had the text messages to prove Deontray had something like this in mind, and a history to show he was violent. Kairsten and many others felt like her concerns were just kind of brushed off, and at the time, Kairsten felt like something horrific was going to have to happen for police to listen to her, and that's exactly what ended up happening. During the trial and court proceedings, an example of Deontray's temperament was put on full display one day when there was a break in the testimonies. While Deontray was being escorted out of the courtroom, there were a few reporters sitting there with their cameras set up ready to record. Deontray walks around the corner, sees the camera and the man filming, and for whatever reason, he decides to take a swing at the man's camera, causing it to tumble over. By the time this gentleman got control of his camera again and refocused the shot, the officers who were behind Deontray the entire time had already tackled him to the ground and began putting him in handcuffs. The trial must have been brutal for the jurors who had to go through the majority of evidence that was recovered in this case, such as a video where Kairsten can be heard desperately pleading and screaming at Deontray to please stop harming their daughter while they were on Facetime. A little later on in that same video, Kairsten can be heard screaming again, "He's killed her, he's killing her." If it wasn't the footage itself, there was many screenshots from the Facetime call that depicted the injuries she sustained, and it's just horrific. Not to mention the images that Kairsten will never be able to get out of her head. This is one of the most evil things you could ever do to your partner whom you had a child with. Why not just let them be happy instead of using your child, who is a blessing, as collateral damage and then lose your life because of it? Deontray, I really hope you get the worst of the worst for the rest of your life. It is heartbreaking how Zevaya's life was stolen from her, from the one person on planet Earth that she called dad. Though it may be important to mention, Deontray has since appealed his guilty verdict and is looking for a new outcome in this case, which of course he does not deserve. Deontray, you are a terrible human being, and I hope you know that deep down. It pains me deeply to think about the traumatic end to Zevaya's life and what she had to experience before it was over. Being her mother, grandfather, someone related to her, or even someone who just knew her personally is unfathomable, and I genuinely feel for those who were directly affected by this crime.
The first day he took my child, like I was giving her a bath in the tub. He stormed in and he took her like out the tub. She wasn't even dressed. And he just took her out the house and drove away in a car. We've been going our separate ways. And I let him be, but he couldn't let me be. He couldn't let me be happy. He couldn't let me move on with my life.
You rewarded us by hurting and killing my granddaughter, Sevaya. You might have taken her last breath, but you cannot kill her spirit, her memory, or her name.
A little over a week after her passing, on April 1st, 2023, Zevaya's mother and her family held a beautiful funeral for the young girl that a large number of people attended to show their love and thoughts for Zevaya. She had a pink casket that was surrounded by pink balloons and stuffed animals, and her mother Kairsten could be seen hugging her daughter's casket throughout the memorial. It was an emotional service, and many of those there were in tears over the reason they were all brought together. The entirety of that 2-hour service was streamed here on YouTube, and the link to it will be somewhere in the description of this video. Following the event, her mother would eventually take her thoughts and pain to social media with a post saying, "I just don't know how to feel anymore. Even when I'm happy, it doesn't last for long. Now I have to remember you for longer than I've known you." Which is such a devastating sentence and a sad reality for their family. Roughly 6 months after her funeral in September of 2023, it was Zevaya's 3rd birthday, and Kairsten tried to make it as special as she possibly could for her late daughter. They threw a party to celebrate her life and the beautiful person that Zevaya was. Family and friends gathered as they shared cake. They put as many pictures of Zevaya up around the house as they could, and they would later hold a balloon release for her, doing everything they could possibly think of to honor her and remember her in her spirit. Kairsten would later make another post saying, "Zevaya, your third birthday was Friday, and Mommy tried her best to make it special for you. You may be gone from my sight, but you will forever live on in my heart." One thing I read the most while researching Zevaya was how amazing her adorable and bubbly personality was, and according to her mother, Zevaya and her smile could bring light to anyone's darkest days. She was truly a gentle little girl with a big heart. She was just so happy, and you can genuinely see that in some of these pictures with her wholesome smile. Zevaya, your life was cut so short, so young, but your spirit lives on in everyone who was fortunate enough to know you, and we will keep your memory close. We know you're up above looking down on your mom and loved ones, keeping them safe, and I really hope you're smiling up there. Fly high, little girl. You're worth more love than you will ever understand. Rest in peace to the precious 2-year-old Zevaya Flanagan.
Waves keep crashing over me. Ooh, still you keep holding on, holding on. You keep holding on. Still you keep holding on, holding on. You keep holding on to my heart.
Although her life is gone, she still lives on in us.
Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. If you made it to the end, go down to the comment section and let me know how you feel about this dude. If you want to, you can follow me on Instagram at Robert Clausen with 2 N's. If you have a story suggestion, DM me on there. I think that's all I have for you guys today though. I just want to say I really appreciate your support. A huge thank you to my Patreon members, and I will see you guys again in a couple Fridays. Until then, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Peace.
I've been spending